Lila collapsed in the crowded market street. Her frail alien body crumpled on the dirty ground, as dozens of creatures stepped around her dying form, refusing to help the starving orphan refugee. The two Eliani diplomats, Novak and Zara, sat in a bustling restaurant in humanity's New Eden colony, savoring the exotic flavors of human cuisine. As Novak scooped a forkful of savory stew into his mouth, Zara brought up the recent incident with Lila. Novak's hand froze, the utensil trembling. He set down his fork, swallowing hard. 14 years old, 14, orphaned by the Civil War, forced to flee to a foreign planet, living in squalid camps on the edge of the colony. Zara nodded, her eyes downcast. The poor girl, malnourished, sick, and yet no one lifted a finger. Our own people, the other refugees, they just ignored her suffering. Novak clenched his fists. She collapsed right there in the street. Dozens of aliens walking by, seeing her convulsing on the ground. They just stepped around her body, like she was trash. The diplomats fell silent for a moment, the weight of Lila's plight hanging heavy in the air. Finally Zara spoke, her voice soft. But the human soldier, he helped her, didn't he? Novak met Zara's gaze, a mixture of shame and gratitude in his eyes. Sergeant Ryan Freeman, he was the only one who stopped, the only one in that whole damn market who cared if that little girl lived or died, and we call ourselves the civilized ones. Zara reached across the table, grasping Novak's hand. We failed Lila. Our people, the aid workers, everyone. But maybe this is a chance to make things right. If we can convince our government to accept human aid for the refugees. Novak squeezed Zara's hand, a glimmer of hope sparking in his heart. Sergeant Freeman showed us the true meaning of compassion. If we can learn from his example, if humans and Eliani can work together, maybe we can prevent any more children from suffering like Lila did. The two diplomats fell quiet again, lost in thought as the sounds of the human city swirled around them. A child's life hung in the balance, and the fate of their two-species alliance as well. Everything depended on what happened next, on whether Lila survived and the humans agreed to help the desperate Eliani refugees. Novak's voice grew animated as he recounted the events that followed. Sergeant Freeman didn't hesitate for a second. He rushed to Lila's side, kneeling beside her. His hands moved with practiced precision as he checked her vital signs. Zara leaned forward, her eyes wide. What did he do then? He immediately called for medical support, Novak replied. But he didn't just wait for them to arrive. He started administering first aid right there on the spot. Novak described how Freeman worked diligently to stabilize Lila's condition, his focus unwavering, even as a crowd of curious onlookers gathered around them. The alien bystanders watched with a mix of detachment and mild interest, but none stepped forward to offer assistance. It was as if they couldn't be bothered to get involved, Novak said, shaking his head in disbelief. But Freeman, he didn't pay them any mind. He just kept working to save Lila's life. When the medical team finally arrived, Novak's voice filled with admiration as he recounted how Freeman gently gathered Lila into his arms. The human soldier carried her to the waiting ambulance, treating her with a tenderness that belied his military background. For the way he held her, it was like she was the most precious thing in the world, Novak said softly, and to him in that moment she was. Zara sat back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. It's hard to imagine any of our people showing that kind of compassion to a stranger, let alone a refugee child. Novak nodded in agreement. The other aliens, they just dispersed once the excitement was over, but Freeman, his dedication didn't end there. He took a sip of his drink, letting the moment hang in the air before continuing. Sergeant Freeman visited Lila in the hospital every single day. He made sure she was getting the best possible care, that she wasn't alone. Zara's eyes glistened with unshed tears. That level of compassion, of selflessness, it's rare to find in any species, but it seems to come so naturally to humans, or at least to Sergeant Freeman. Novak reached across the table, grasping Zara's hand once more. If there's one thing this incident has shown us, it's that we have much to learn from humanity. their capacity for empathy, for caring about others, regardless of their background or species. It's something we need to aspire to. The two diplomats fell silent, each lost in their own thoughts as they contemplated the profound impact one human soldier's actions could have on the future of their alliance. Novak paused, his gaze growing distant as he recalled the bond that had formed between Sergeant Freeman and Lila during her recovery. You know, it wasn't just a matter of Freeman making sure she got the medical care she needed. He went above and beyond in every possible way. Zara leaned forward, her interest piqued. What do you mean? Well, Freeman took the time to really get to know Lila. He learned about her past, about how she'd lost her entire family in the Civil War, and he made it his mission to help her start a new life here on New Eden. Novak went on to describe how Freeman had assisted Lila in finding a more permanent place to live, a small apartment in a community that welcomed Eliani refugees. The sergeant had even helped her enroll in a local school, recognizing the importance of education in rebuilding her life. But it wasn't just practical things, Novak continued. Freeman introduced Lila to human customs and traditions. He invited her to celebrate holidays with his own family, made sure she felt included and welcomed. It was like he became a surrogate father to her. Zara shook her head in amazement. That level of dedication, of personal involvement, it's unheard of. Most soldiers would have considered their duty done once she was out of immediate danger. Novak nodded. Exactly. But for Freeman, it was about more than just fulfilling his duties. He genuinely cared about Lila's well-being, about helping her build a future for herself. A thought occurred to Zara, and she frowned slightly. But what about Freeman's superiors? Surely they must have had concerns about one of their soldiers becoming so involved with a refugee child. Novak chuckled. Oh, they did. At first, anyway. They were worried about breaches of protocol, about the potential for favoritism or compromised objectivity. He took a sip of his drink before continuing. But as they watched Freeman's interactions with Lila, as they saw the positive impact he was having on her life, their attitudes started to change. They began to see the value in what he was doing. Novak leaned back in his chair, a note of pride creeping into his voice. In the end, not only did they allow Freeman to continue supporting Lila, but they actively encouraged other soldiers to follow his example. They saw it as a way to build bridges between the human military and the refugee population. Zara's eyes widened. That's incredible. I can only imagine how much of a difference that must have made for the refugees, knowing that the humans were truly invested in their well-being. Novak smiled. It did. Freeman's actions and the ripple effect they had led to a significant improvement in the living conditions within the camps. More than that, it fostered a sense of unity, of shared purpose, between the humans and the various alien species seeking shelter here. He met Zara's gaze, his expression serious. It just goes to show sometimes all it takes is one person's compassion, one individual's willingness to go the extra mile, to change the course of history, and in this case, that person was Sergeant Ryan Freeman. Zara sat back in her chair, her eyes wide with wonder. It's incredible to think that one act of kindness could have such a profound impact on the galaxy. Novak nodded, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Indeed, Lila's story is a testament to the power of compassion and the resilience of the human spirit. He leaned forward, his voice growing animated. You know, I had the privilege of meeting Lila a few years ago at a conference on refugee rights. She was there to speak about her experiences and the work of Freeman's legacy. Zara's eyes sparkled with interest. What was she like? She was extraordinary, Novak replied, his voice filled with admiration. Despite everything she had been through, she radiated this sense of hope and determination. It was clear that Freeman's influence had shaped her in ways that went beyond mere survival. Novak went on to describe how Lila had taken the stage, her voice steady and strong as she recounted her story. She spoke of the hardships she had faced as a refugee, the indifference and cruelty she had encountered, but she also spoke of the kindness shown to her by Sergeant Freeman, and how it had changed the course of her life. She said that Freeman's actions had taught her the true meaning of compassion, Novak recalled, that even in the darkest of times, a single act of kindness could be a light in the darkness. Zara nodded, her expression thoughtful. And that light has spread, hasn't it? Freeman's legacy has become a beacon of hope for refugees across the galaxy. Novak smiled. It has. Lila's organization has provided aid and support to countless individuals, helping them to rebuild their lives in the wake of unimaginable trauma. But more than that, it has inspired others to follow in Freeman's footsteps, to show compassion and understanding to those in need. He paused, his gaze growing distant. You know, I think that's the true legacy of Sergeant Ryan Freeman. Not just the lives he saved or the aid he provided, but the way he inspired others to be better, to strive for a more compassionate galaxy. Zara's eyes glistened with unshed tears. It's a beautiful thought, isn't it? That one person's actions could have such a far-reaching impact, could change the course of history in ways we can't even begin to imagine. Novak reached across the table, grasping Zara's hand. It is. And it's a reminder that each of us has the power to make a difference, to be that light in the darkness for someone else. The two diplomats fell silent, each lost in their own thoughts as they contemplated the incredible story of Lila and the human soldier who had saved her life. It was a story of hope and resilience, of the triumph of compassion over indifference, and it was a story that would be told for generations to come, a reminder of the power of the human spirit to overcome even the greatest of odds. As the conversation lulled, Novak's thoughts turned to the broader implications of Freeman's actions. You know, it's not just the refugee crisis that has been impacted by this story, he mused. Freeman's legacy has had a ripple effect across the entire galactic community. Zara tilted her head, intrigued. In what way? Well, for one thing, it has forced us to confront our own prejudices and biases, Novak explained. The way our people, and so many others, turned a blind eye to Lila's suffering. It was a wake-up call. It made us realize that we had become complacent, that we had allowed ourselves to become disconnected from the struggles of others. He leaned back in his chair, his expression pensive. But Freeman's actions, and the way they inspired Lila and so many others, it has sparked a renewed sense of empathy and understanding across the galaxy. Governments and organizations that once viewed refugees as a burden are now recognizing their potential, their inherent worth as individuals. Novak's voice grew more impassioned as he continued. And it's not just about refugees. Freeman's legacy has encouraged us to look beyond our differences, to recognize our common humanity, or whatever you want to call it for non-human species. He chuckled softly. The point is, it has fostered a greater sense of unity and cooperation among the galactic community. Zara nodded, her expression thoughtful. It's true, I've seen it myself in the way our own government has begun to approach diplomacy and interspecies relations. There's a greater emphasis on understanding and collaboration, on finding common ground rather than focusing on our differences. Exactly, Novak agreed. And that's the true power of Freeman's legacy. It has shown us that compassion and empathy are not weaknesses, but strengths. That by reaching out to others, by recognizing their inherent dignity and worth, we can build a better future for all of us. He met Zara's gaze, his eyes shining with conviction. Freeman's actions may have been small in the grand scheme of things, but they have had an impact that will be felt for generations to come. He has shown us the way forward, and it is up to us to follow in his footsteps, to continue the work that he and Lila have begun. As the conversation between Novak and Zara turned to the lasting impact of Sergeant Ryan Freeman's actions, a somber expression fell over Novak's face. He leaned forward, his voice low and heavy with emotion. There's something else you should know about Freeman, he began, his eyes meeting Zara's. His story, it doesn't have a happy ending. Zara's brow furrowed, concern etched across her features. What do you mean? Novak took a deep breath, steeling himself for the tale he was about to recount. Years after his encounter with Lila, Freeman found himself deployed to Zephyrus Prime, a planet ravaged by war. The enemy, a ruthless faction known as the Karath, had a reputation for their blatant disregard for civilian lives. He paused, his gaze distant as if reliving the events in his mind. During one particularly brutal battle, Freeman's unit received a distress call from a group of trapped refugees, mostly women and children. They were caught in the crossfire, their lives hanging in the balance. Zara listened intently, her heart already sinking as she anticipated the direction of the story. Freeman, being the man he was, volunteered to lead the rescue mission without hesitation, Novak continued, his voice tinged with a mix of admiration and sorrow. He knew the risks, the dangers that awaited him, but he couldn't turn his back on those innocent lives. Novak's eyes glistened as he recounted the harrowing mission. As Freeman and his team fought their way through enemy lines, his thoughts turned to Lila. He saw her face in every terrified child, every desperate mother. He knew their pain, their suffering, all too well. Zara reached across the table, gently placing her hand over Novak's in a gesture of support and understanding. "In the end," Novak said, his voice wavering, "Freeman made the ultimate sacrifice. With the refugees on the verge of being evacuated, the Karath launched a final, devastating assault. Freeman, in a moment of unwavering bravery, single-handedly held off the enemy forces, giving his team the precious time they needed to get the civilians to safety." A heavy silence fell between the two diplomats as Novak struggled to compose himself. He didn't make it out. Freeman fell that day, succumbing to his injuries on the battlefield. Zara's eyes widened, tears welling up as the weight of Freeman's sacrifice sank in. "He gave his life for them," she whispered, her voice trembling. Novak nodded solemnly. The news of his death sent shockwaves through the galactic community. Freeman was mourned as a hero, a shining example of the human spirit at its finest. He took a shuddering breath before continuing. Lila, she was devastated when she learned of Freeman's fate. He had been more than just her savior, he was her mentor, her friend. In her grief, she made a vow to carry on his legacy, to ensure that his sacrifice would never be forgotten. Zara wiped a stray tear from her cheek, her heart heavy with the knowledge of Freeman's tragic end. His death, it's a tremendous loss. But his actions, his selflessness, they serve as a powerful reminder of the capacity for good that lies within the human spirit. Novak nodded in agreement. Freeman's memory lives on, inspiring countless individuals across the galaxy to stand up for what is right, even in the face of overwhelming adversity. His courage, his compassion, they've become a beacon of hope in a universe too often consumed by darkness. As the two diplomats fell silent, each lost in their own thoughts, a sense of profound respect and gratitude settled over them. The story of Sergeant Ryan Freeman, the human soldier who had given his life for the innocent, would forever be etched in their hearts and minds. In that moment, as they prepared to go their separate ways, Novak and Zara silently acknowledged the indelible mark that one man's bravery had left on the galaxy. Freeman's legacy, born from an act of kindness toward a struggling Eliani child, had grown into a force for change, a testament to the enduring power of compassion and sacrifice. The universe would remember Ryan Freeman, not just as a soldier, but as a symbol of the very best of humanity. His story, whispered in the halls of power and in the hearts of the oppressed, would endure long after his passing, a guiding light in the ongoing struggle for a better tomorrow. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.